So our final speaker is one of our Patient Day's greatest supporters and one of Ovacare's greatest supporters in general. That's Professor Seamus O'Reilly. I'm sure a number of you know him, and for those of you that don't, the privilege is here for you today to meet him. Seamus trained as medical oncologist in Johns Hopkins Oncology Center in Baltimore. He was a principal investigator in the US-based gynecological oncology group. In 2001, he was appointed consultant medical oncologist in the Cork Mercy and South Infirmary Victoria Hospitals. He's an active member of the All-Ireland Cooperative Oncology Research Group, who oversee cancer clinical trials in Ireland, and he's also a member of the Cork Cancer Research Centre. And he's going to take us through his presentation on what new treatments are on the horizon. So a very warm welcome for Chief.
Thanks very much. Thank you for the invite and the kind words. I'm very conscious that I'm the only thing that's standing between all of you and there. And so the person I'd like to say thanks most to is ye for staying to listen to me, and because this is temptation, big time. And so this is so when we talk about cancer, I think cancer research in Ireland in terms is divided up into looking at who develops cancer. Then what treatments are available for them, and then what treatments we need to have for patients now that they're better, the better treatment, and then treatments for the near future that are more optimum in terms of less side effects and more activity in the future. So these are the things I want to talk about today. But the first research I want to present is here from Cork, and this is a cancer map of ovarian cancer in Ireland. And green is average, white is better than average, and purple is not good. So you can see in the cancer map where we live here, and in the eastern part of Northern Ireland, there's a significant clustering of ovarian cancer. And this is unexplained. And the only one of these maps that's logical to me is the melanoma map, which in the melanoma map there's a band of cancer that runs along the southeast here for melanoma. Because of a higher sun exposure. I grew up in Galway, sun never shines there like it does here. And you have to go abroad for sun. But there's a melanoma belt as well. But this belt here, this clustering and increase in our community is not explained. But it's with research like this where we can say there's a problem, then if we can't measure it, we can't manage it. And people have used these maps to increase resources for cancer care. For instance, in Waterford, they used these cancer maps to get more skin specialists because they said, we get more skin cancer here, you need to give us more resources. So this is where research empowers and can lead to better outcomes. No, sorry, I'm just wrestling with this. So if we look at ovarian cancer, the news is good in that there's been an improved outcome in the lifetime of most people in this room. So in 1975, the average survival of advanced disease was 10 months. Now it's moving up to over 5 years, over several years. We're looking at 72 months with some of our treatments. And this is being incremental, gradual over time, more surgery and chemotherapy, and then better chemotherapy drugs. And this So this integration of care, this combination of better drugs and better treatment is what was discussed in the National Cancer Strategy in 2006. And they said if we stopped all developments in cancer care in Ireland at that time and just used what we had in a better way, we would improve cancer outcome by 25%. And that led to the cancer centres, so in terms of better access to care and more multidisciplinary care. And if you were and then another analogy for this kind of integration of care is this. So this is the latest version of the Volkswagen Beetle. It's available, and it can do 300 miles per gallon. And but it's not just the engine that has the greater economy, it has everything else. Better tires, better electronics, more sleeker aerodynamics. And cancer care is like that. If you have a brilliant surgeon, i.e. a brilliant engine, and everything else is not good around him, he can't shine. And equally in cancer care, it's important that everybody shines together, that we all integrate together and that leads to better outcomes for patients. So these treatment advances are really involve integration of care, and one of the things we can do to make care better in Ireland is integrate cancer research more into care, because that improves outcomes. And these advances in care have been shown consistently globally. So this is an improved number of patients surviving for 5 years with cancer has gone from the mid-40s in 1955 to 70%. And you can see it isn't plateauing, it's going to continue to go up in our lifetime. When I was at Hopkins, the Irish breast cancer survival rates were 65%. Now they're 80%. By the time I retired, it's anticipated to be 90%. So moving to ovarian cancer. Ovarian cancer is a more challenging cancer because it's silent. So it starts off with cancer cells within the ovary or within the fallopian tube, and this spreads within the tummy cavity silently. So by the time the patients present, as many of you know, they have advanced disease at presentation with involvement of disease involving the bowel and the omentum, which is a kind of a fat pad that separates out the tummy wall from the intestine. And this is the greatest challenge for it, because you can see here that as cancer develops with time, cancer becomes more complex. You get more genetic changes occurring, so it's less simple to treat, because for every pathway you target with the cancer, another problem develops. And this is reflected in this slide here, where this is the average cancer course. So patients start a diagnosis, and then they have surgery and chemotherapy. The cancer comes back a variable amount, may come back a variable amount of time after that, and further chemotherapy is given. But if you look at these intervals here, you see the intervals between each treatment is shortening. And the reason for that is that you select out more resistant cancer cells each time. It's a bit like weed killer on a lawn. If you put out Roundup, you'll institute maximum damage. But then the weeds that develop after the Roundup may respond to path clear, but they probably won't. And you need brushwood. But each cycle, you're getting less activity in terms of the treatment, because the cancer is becoming more complex and becoming more resistant to treatment. To guide us in cancer care, we need to look at how cancer functions, what makes it different to a normal cancer cell. And this is from a paper in 2000, it's called Hallmark of Cancer. And what they looked at was what makes cancer cells different. What makes them different is that they don't die, so normal cells grow for a period of time and then die. They're self-sufficient, so they've stimulatory factors around them that allow them to grow. The body's anti-growth signals don't work on them, and then they can spread. Because if a growth can spread, it really is limited in what it can do, but it's this ability to spread that it causes problems for us in patients with cancer in terms of symptomatology. And then one point in terms of being able to spread, but you need blood vessels to sustain it, to deliver oxygen to the tumour. So this thing called sustained angiogenesis is where the tumour can continually make the body feed it with blood vessels. And then it's limitless repetitive potential. It doesn't clear. When we talk to the medical students, the analogy we use is Anglo-Irish Bank. So if you think about Anglo-Irish Bank on its own, it really wouldn't have survived on its own if it was like the bank around the corner down there. And what made it so effective was we had no financial regulation. We had self-sufficiency and growth signals in that it had access to the European and German banks, so that allowed it to have much more capital than it normally would. It spread. It spread to other countries, and it spread to other towns and villages. And then it had a ready market in terms of there was a desire for it in our communities, and limitless repetitive potential will be paying for it forever. So it's a gift that keeps on giving. These hallmarks of cancer are integrated into this. So this is the cancer clinical trials globally in 2012. So in Europe alone, there were 34,000 clinical trials ongoing. In the United States, 62,000. So there's a huge effort in our universities and in our hospitals and in our communities to improve cancer care through research. If we think of this as an industrial development, the Manhattan Project was the largest industrial project in the world in the 1940s. It took 4 years, and it took enormous financial wealth to actually develop it. But in cancer research at the moment, there are 3 Manhattan projects ongoing in the world every year. So the amount of investment that we're putting into it is almost 12 times greater than the Manhattan project, but it's on a yearly basis. So there's substantial interest and work being done on this. So it's only natural in this regard that what our thinking of cancer would also have evolved. And this advanced thinking in cancer is important because these are the 2 areas which are of most interest in patients with ovarian cancer at the moment. And they are that looking at how the cancer cells avoid destruction by the immune system, and then the other thing is that cancer cells are unstable. And these are the 2 areas that we look at. And this is the cancer hallmarks in 2011, which is the kind of the successor from the 2000 paper. And it also says that cancer isn't just one cell, it's an ecosystem. It's a society and a community, because a cell on its own, we often think of the cancer cell as a rogue item, but it isn't. It's a rogue within a community. So harnessing the community to deal with the rogue is going to be more effective than just trying to take it out with sniper fire alone. We've also learned that cancer cells are much more clever than we thought. So this is a brain tumor called a glioblastoma multiforme. It's the most aggressive brain tumor that we treat. And in this paper here, we all often think of the cancer cell developing, it multiplies and then it brings blood vessels around. But this paper here shows that these cancer cells can actually make their own blood vessels. So they don't require other blood vessels. They don't tell the body to bring me some blood. They actually make the blood themselves. So the adaptation of cancer, the ability of it to mimic other things and to adapt and to do things that we previously hadn't thought they were capable of, is also becoming more important. As a consequence of this, we use drugs that inhibit blood vessel formation, like Avastin, which many people with ovarian cancer would have experienced. We use this in patients with brain tumors. It's effective because it reduces swelling around the tumor, but also it stops the tumor forming its own blood vessels. And that's probably how it's so effective in this group, which doesn't tend to respond very well to chemotherapy. There's a huge amount of interest in why cancers are different to normal cells, but also looking at ways that we can target them. Is there one trigger that is the kind of the nucleus for what makes cancer different? So one of the significant research has gone on in cancer genetics, and that has led to was the platform for the last slide of the hallmarks of cancer. So just this is an example of what, if you find the target, what you can do. So this lady presented with a 3-month history of changes involving her left breast. The breast here is basically replaced. You can see the nipple is gone. And there's this kind of dark, not pleasant looking area here. And the other breast is also abnormal, it's pushed to one side, and there are cancer changes within this area as well. So she had the pathology showed that her cancer was sensitive to a drug called Herceptin. And the reason for this was that cancer had a genetic change where this gene, HER2, was switched on. So if we got a drug to switch it off, then we could we could kill the cancer cell by making it sensitive to chemotherapy. And so a new study had just come out showing a significant improvement in her treatment if she had a couple of drugs combined together. So we signed her up for that and arranged for her to come into the day ward. She was seen she was seen in the clinic on, we say, Wednesday, and she was to be treated on Friday in the day ward. So you can see here that she could wear a blouse here with a cleavage at the time that this photograph was taken. You can imagine it anyway. By the time she came into the day ward, 4 days later, she had to wear a polo neck because this is all moved up here. So this was a very aggressive cancer. And our scans also showed that she had lung involvement here. When we did a chest x-ray, the cancer had already spread. So this is her 2 years later. You can see the breast is normal. And this breast here is also normal as well. There's no evidence of cancer at the present time, and she remains on treatment. She comes in for treatment every 3 weeks. She's not on chemotherapy anymore. And the reason for this is that her cancer was addicted to this change. And by switching off that change, we could control her cancer. So there's been the current thinking, this led to what we call the Cancer Genome Atlas, where they looked at cancers specifically to find these targets that they could then, these areas that they could target. And ovarian cancer was one of the 12 cancers that they looked at initially. And what they do is they take samples from 1,000 women with ovarian cancer, and they do genetic testing on it and look at a variety of different genetic assessments and using a variety of different platforms. So they don't just look at what changes are present within the cancer, but also how those changes interact with each other. And that produces a map. And the map is basically the hardwiring of the cancer, so that they can look at maybe a seminal area that they can target to switch it on. Sorry. These changes have been facilitated by this. This is called Moore's Law, and it relates to the power of computing. So the first person to have these gene sequenced was a guy called Watson, and he was Crick and Watson were the people who discovered the structure of DNA, and that cost $2.3 million to do. But now, because computing power has accelerated, you can now get your genome checked for about $1,000. So you can take your cancer and you can go off for genetic sequencing to see what changes are present within it. So this represents an enormous advance, because it means that in the real world, we're looking at a stage probably in our lifetime where when people come in with cancer to the lab, their cancer can be taken and sequenced for genetic changes that might lead to improved therapies. All of this work has led to what we call roadmaps. These are called therapeutic roadmaps, where we look at varieties of different changes in the cancer. So the patient who had the great response, she had this HER2 change in her breast cancer. And in melanoma, 60% of melanomas here have a change called BRAF, and that's a protein that's stimulated, and we give a drug to switch it off, and we can see similar dramatic responses in that. What about ovarian cancer? Well, ovarian cancer has been less fortunate in that the pathways aren't as good. We don't have this 20% target. They're much smaller. They're like in the teens in terms of a target. So we probably need to look at the breast cancer in a different way to the way we've looked at, say, breast cancer or lung cancer, where these targets have been found and then switched off or switched on. That it's more complex than that. So if we go back to the hallmarks that I talked about, I want to focus on two hallmarks: genome instability and immune destruction. So with these, you ignore the genetic changes completely. You don't look for them. You just attack the cancer cell in a different way. So the genetic things explained here, it's called someone got to me this idea first, but it's called the Ikeda Principle. So with the Ikeda Principle, if we take a chair, this chair is 2 legs. So if you take a chair you're on has 4 legs, right? I can't bring them up. So the chair you're on has 4 legs. Ignore that chair, right? So and your cancer has 4 legs. So if you take one of the legs off, with say you damage the genetics in the cancer cell, and you take one of those legs off, the table will still stand, or a 3-legged stool will still stand, and you'll have very little effects. Now, in some patients with the BRCA mutation, the BRCA mutation is where the repair of DNA is affected, and this change occurs in women in our community with early stage, with breast and ovarian cancer families, or ovarian cancer or breast cancer, but it also occurs in a significant proportion of people with papillary serous cancer as well, where it's within the cancer itself. It's not a predisposition to cancer, the cancer just picked it up. And those patients with that cancer and patients who've inherited that change have only 3 legs in their cancer, because their repair mechanism is wrong. So if you damage the 3rd remaining leg, then the table will fall and the cancer will die. But this also means that the normal cells in our body, which have, such as the bone marrow and that, won't be as affected by it as it would be. So it's a very specific anti-cancer therapy for these cells which have this genetic abnormality in ovarian cancer, papillary serous ovarian cancer, for instance, or in hereditary forms of breast and ovarian cancer. And this is just where here you have normal cells, they get damage to DNA and they have no effect. But in cells which have the BRCA mutation, they don't have the repair pathways, they're more vulnerable, and therefore they go on to die. So these agents are called PARP inhibitors. and they're given by mouth. And the first one that we use in our community at the moment is called olaparib, and it's available through AstraZeneca, and they have a compassionate access program for it. I'm just going to go. So, and the basis for it is that it damages repair in cancer cells with the BRCA mutation, either from hereditary or within the cancer itself, and leading to cell death, whereas normal cells are fine. So the advantage of this is no hair loss, for instance, because it's selective only for the ovarian cancer cells. So the side effect profile with this is very good. Tiredness has been a problem, and nausea, and some people can have bone marrow effects with it. And in a study of patients with advanced ovarian cancer who had responsive to they had initial therapy, had a good response to therapy. Half of them got this drug called olaparib, and half didn't. And what it did was it delayed the recurrence of cancer from 5 months to 8 months. And in some patients, you can see significant advantages here with cancer staying away, whereas in the group who didn't get it, virtually all of the cancers have come back within a 1 year period. So this drug, olaparib, is currently undergoing a health technology assessment with the government. The company have been really generous in terms of giving free access to it in patients who fulfill the criteria as a BRCA mutation carrier who've responded to treatment. So in Cork at the moment we have 5 patients on it, and the stumbling block is cost, because it's €4,000 a month. So without this compassionate access program, most patients cannot afford it, and I would have great issues with them paying for it. We have a very active clinical trials group in Ireland, which are important in terms of access to these kind of drugs. So this is ICOR, the Irish Clinical Oncology Research Group, is going to be renamed next month because this name is not intuitive, and most patients with cancer have no idea what it is, and most of the politicians in our community don't know what it is either. So we're trying to get a more intuitive name for it, which will be more reflective which will be more intuitive in terms of patients and awareness of cancer trials and research. The organisation was founded in 1996, and it has 98% of all cancer treating specialists in Ireland are involved in it. It has collaborations with major groups such as the Breast International Group, the Eastern Cooperative Oncology Group. And that allows us access to trials in the UK and from America and from Australia for patients with cancer. So it's really good from that point of view. It's also an example of collaboration, because traditionally hospitals compete for egos, patients, finances, resources. But this is a collaborative group between all of the cancer centres in Ireland, and it's great from that point of view. It's been a huge Irish success story. Its mission is to gain access to the latest cancer treatments for patients through research, and also to facilitate an environment of cancer research in our society, which will prioritise it. There's a new cancer strategy coming out. The one I showed you was from 2006. So there's one now, 2016 is due to be published. And we've made the message that we've tried to take to them is to make cancer research a routine part of Irish healthcare. This new cancer strategy is going to be really important, because cancer is increasing in our community significantly, and by the time when I started, when I was a medical student, 1 in 6 people in Ireland got cancer. By the time I retire, 1 in 2 will. So it's an enormous societal burden for us, and it's a significant cause of suffering in our communities. So these strategy documents, I used to think they were not hopeless as a medical student, but they really are the way of getting people together, and they're the kind of the roadmap for the disciplines, and also they're the roadmaps to show to politicians who pay for what we do of how we can deliver care. The ICOG is also important in terms of healthcare economics. It's been estimated it has saved 18 million to the health service in terms of drug costs. The newer drugs are very expensive. By having clinical trials, patients get access to them earlier and also for free. The newer drugs that we're going to talk about in the next few years are even more expensive than the current ones. One of them, nivolumab for ovarian, which will be used in your lifetime for ovarian cancer, is more expensive than gold. And so by having these trials, we have access to care for these really expensive drugs for our patients, and also our patients have exposure to them earlier on in their illness when they're more likely to benefit from them. There's also equity of access to them. some of our patients are paying for these more expensive drugs, but not everybody can afford to pay. And it's very difficult for families, where they feel that they might have the money if they really worked hard at it, and also feel a moral obligation to pay for the drugs. So I think it's far better to have clinical trials where people can learn from it, and where there isn't that burden of guilt for people. I also feel that people pay enough taxes in Ireland already without having to pay for the drugs. Our organisation has grown from 2006 to 2015 in terms of, you can see the number of patients on clinical trials is increasing significantly. We would hope to grow this dramatically. We need to grow dramatically so that our patients have access to the newest treatments available. Just to make the point, if you look at treatments that are now standard of care given to Irish patients beforehand, Herceptin for breast cancer, that lady we saw earlier, the patented for breast cancer, ipilimumab for melanoma, and newer forms of radiotherapy. So these were all available much earlier on for patients because we had clinical trials available for it. And so lives were saved and suffering was prevented and care was made easier. This is the next generation trial, niraparib. I'm just putting it up there because this is going to be a PARP inhibitor also. Niraparib is great, but it's not, it could be better. And this is the next generation of PARP inhibitors to see in a similar way with BRCA mutation patients to see if they respond to do a similar trial, looking at maybe a better drug, maybe better tolerated. One of the things about cancer is that it's complex. As we've said, it can form blood vessels, and one of the things we've learned is that real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. And this is an example of how cancer adapts. So this is a patient with myeloma, and what they did was they took a sample of his cancer and they analysed it. They looked at the genetic changes within it, and you can see he had 4 clones. And he started off, and then he got treatment, and then the clones adapted. One clone became smaller, and the other one became bigger. And you can see it evolves then into the clone changes, then you can see the colouring changes. But this is the clone that he died from, this blue clone here, which is a tiny, like a fragment of the clone here. So this is the weed killer principle where you select out over time, but also it means that if you wanted to make an impact on the patient, then this is the most virulent clone. If you knew about that earlier on, it would be much easier to, if you would target that earlier on in his care, they would have a better outcome with treatment. So in ovarian cancer, there's work on this looking at genetic sequencing of resistant ovarian cancer, not just the one that the Cancer Genome Atlas looks at where it's newly diagnosed, but later on. And what they do is they look at the various different clones of cancer where the cancer started here and then spread throughout the body, and they've taken samples from each of those, from the fluid, the acidic fluid within the abdomen, looking at pathways where things are more advanced, that the difference between the primary tumour and the relapsed tumour, so that we can look at ways of targeting the relapse more effectively. And in Ireland, Sharon is here, the innovation, the Irish National Network of Ovarian Cancer Collaboration is looking at this also, this kind of longitudinal study where we don't just look at the thing at the beginning, but we look at the thing during the time, because it's only we need to help cure more people early on, but we need to help people who aren't cured live longer and better later on. And this is a work that they've involved in, and the Molecular Medicine Ireland website has access. You see what work they're doing. And collaboration in life is the engine of change, but collaboration in medicine is mandatory for change. And you can see here that this is a grouping of people together, collaborating in research at the Cork Cancer Research Centre, Galway University Hospital, UCC, and a variety of pharmaceutical and diagnostic companies as well, and also advocacy groups. And this is very important. The Americans have been at the forefront of integrating advocacy groups into care and making care better as a result. And I'll talk about that later. So this is an Irish-led initiative, and I'm grateful to Sharon to give me the slides of this. It also involves ICOG, the clinical research group. So it's linking up laboratory-based work, clinical work, cancer registry work, and our healthcare work. So it's really phenomenally integrative, which is going to mean it will be effective, be successful. And this is just one of the papers just to show the International Journal of Molecular Sciences, to show that these collaborations are bearing fruit, and it's being productive and respected internationally. So one of the problems, if I'm talking about all this genetic change, it's very difficult. It's difficult. So you could say, well, it looks a bit like a never-ending story in terms of genetic change, in terms of trying to get on top of it. It's a bit like a vulture fund, you know, to just keep adapting. I'm going to integrate the vulture fund into my Hallmark of Cancer slide. Anyway, so this is Eileen Gray, who was an Irish polyglot. She was a furniture designer, architect, artist, and she had an exhibition in the Pompidou Centre, and she was saying to create one, you must first call everything into question. And in medicine, one of our traditional thinkings is that the immune system wasn't a great bet, because it seemed to be knackered in patients with cancer, and if it wasn't knackered to begin with, our chemotherapy drugs definitely knackered. But in some patients, they with melanoma and kidney cancer, we found dramatic results with immunotherapy. So this is a slide of patients with melanoma receiving a new immune treatment called antibody treatment, and the growths got bigger initially, but ultimately got smaller. But the bottom slide here is lung cancer. And lung cancer is a very difficult cancer to treat. And surprisingly, in these studies, lung cancer responded even better than melanoma responded. And you can see these liver lesions are here, and they've gone away over time. And they've gone away for a long time. The slides I showed you before, a lot of the treatments were, you know, pulled out after 3 to 6 months. But in these studies, this has gone 15 months. This would be unheard of. Just to put this in context, the average life expectancy for patients with advanced lung cancer, stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer, which this will be on the more aggressive phase of stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer, is 12 months. So this result is truly remarkable. And certainly as I as a medical student and as a trainee was prejudiced totally in this area, because I remember hearing about these studies starting and I was like, you've got to be kidding. But I was wrong. And this is how it works. Within our cancer cells, the immune system there are ways in which the immune system is switched off by the cancer cell. And these newer drugs bind to these areas and switch these regulators off. So the immune system becomes increased as a consequence. And these have shown activity in a variety of cancers that we no longer expect, such as colon cancer, ovarian cancer, head and neck cancer. And the big thing with them is that unlike standard treatment, the targeted treatments I showed you before, like the olaparib, they're better than the standard treatment, but ultimately the outcome is similar later on. Whereas with immunotherapy, you get the overlap initially, yes, but there's a cohort of patients who benefit substantially from treatment later on, where we either they're gone into long-term remission or potentially are cured as a result of these immunotherapies. And these immunotherapies also do different things than we think about before. So usually when people have brain involvement with cancer, it doesn't tend to respond to drug therapy because the drugs are big and they don't get into that area very well. But in immunotherapy it does, because it stimulates the immune system, which then goes into the area easily. So there's a lot of changes in our thinking of the activity of these drugs. The other thing that happens is there's different side effects. So we get the immune system is switched on, so it's switched on to normal tissues, the skin, the bowel, and the liver. So you get patients getting skin rashes and diarrhea as opposed to bone marrow side effects or hair loss. Sometimes these changes parallel, the side effects parallel the response. So 4 years ago we had a patient who was on these drugs for melanoma, and she came in with hepatitis, and she went into liver failure, and we gave her steroids and she got better. And then she continues to get better. And then her hair color changed because she developed vitiligo, and where she lost the melanin pigment in her skin because the immune system was switched on and stayed switched on, even though her treatment was about 4 years ago. But her advanced melanoma stayed away. Her hair has gone white, and she's become albino. But it's been a dramatic response to therapy as a result of that, and a tremendous outcome in someone who wouldn't be with us. There's a growing interest in this. These are some of the studies early on, but this is the number of projected studies that are going to be available over time, and this is going to increase. So the number of clinical trials in the US based on these agents is increasing dramatically, and there's enormous interest in it. In Ireland, we have one trial looking at chemotherapy with a drug called avelumab, which is one of these drugs available through this Pfizer company. These are called the Javelin trials. And we're about to open another trial called the Javelin 100 trial. And in the Javelin 100 trial, it will be for women with newly diagnosed ovarian cancer. So if you're diagnosed with advanced ovarian cancer, you get standard chemotherapy, and then usually 6 to 8 cycles, and then observation. Or you get chemotherapy followed by immunotherapy, or immunotherapy and chemotherapy followed by immunotherapy. So this is a fantastic opportunity. So it will be available through our clinical trials network nationally, and probably in the summer. We just got initiated in it the other day. I think it represents an enormous breakthrough, but also in terms of access to care for patients with cancer. I guess one of the issues is that none of this includes a drug called Avastin in it, and many people consider Avastin the standard of care. But Avastin is available later on, whereas these drugs may not be available later on for some time. So this represents a window of opportunity, and we would always have Avastin for patients later on in terms of therapy. I also feel that if these drugs are going to work, the earlier on you put them in care, the better the outcome will be for people. So I think this is a tremendous development. Finally, just in terms of cancer research, I think a lot of these developments have talked about newer treatments and that, but I think there's also a concern that what we think is important and what patients I think is important may be very different. And vision without action is a daydream, and action without vision is a nightmare. And some of in the new cancer strategies, there's been a lot of focus on advocacy groups. I know Ellen O'Neill from the Cork from the Arc House has spoken as to emphasise the view of patients and families. When I gave I'm the director of training for oncology, and I gave a career advice talk to the oncologist. I started oncology training when I was 27, and a lot has changed since then. I'm older than 27 now, and this is, I didn't have a photograph when I was ever 27. This is a photograph of me at 8 months, and you can see that the widow's peak hasn't gone, and this is my twin brother, and we look different. We look more similar now than we did then. He took all the food, you can see here. It took me a while to realise this when I was 51. But you can see here, that line here, like he's in the shadow and I'm not. Something of the dark about him. That's, anyway, if I had recognised that at the time, I would have got the food. And so when we talk about them, I think that one of the, obviously, time moves on, and before you know you're old too early and smart too late. But one of the things that I've learned is languages that didn't, or maybe you heard but didn't appreciate in medical school. And some of them are the languages of teamwork, leadership, and management, that you're only as good as your team. But we're trained very much as individuals rather than as team players. The language of self-care, the language of molecular medicine. Many of these changes that I've talked about today were not conceptualized when I was in medical school. The language of money, because money dictates an awful lot of what's available for patients and an awful lot of healthcare. The language of guilt, when things don't go well for the patients that you treat and you feel you could have done better. The language of thanks, how to thank people, that thank you is more important than please. But also the language of thanks from patients, that you will never be able to thank people more than patients thank you. And the language of information technology and the advantage of, say, probably the most important medical development in my lifetime has been the internet, because it's leveled the playing field in terms of information. You have immediate access to information, and it allows dissemination of the information more readily. But more importantly, the language of patients. And I think that the language of patients, we learn a lot from our patients, but I think that our patients probably need to have more of a role in terms of healthcare delivery. We call this guy, Richard Flanagan, wrote a book called The Narrow Road to the Dark North, which won the Booker Prize, and he talks about this thing called conspiracy of experience. And in this conspiracy of experience, he talks about a marriage and how a couple alter each other over time. And I think that in medicine, the conspiracy of experience is probably the interaction between doctors and patients, and how the experience of being a doctor on a patient molds, how the patients mold the doctor, and vice versa. but I think that we probably need much more involvement of patients in healthcare. I think that it would be better. I often say to our students that it'd be great, maybe not good, but to be a patient in your own waiting room. In the States now, there was an article in the New England Journal called Immersion Therapy. So what immersion therapy is that they take the board of the hospital and they bring them in at 7:30 in the morning and they get them to sign confidentiality agreements, and then they put them in scrubs. And they get them to follow the teams around during the day so that they know what it's like to be a patient. You know, they see things from the point of view of what are the obstacles in healthcare delivery. And I think, I often feel that immersion therapy in Ireland would be maybe that the doctors would become the patients for a while. But I got and I was reminded of this from and our politicians. So I got a call about a patient that was trying to get into hospital. His TD called and said, "Come here," and I said, "Come here too." And so he said, I said, "We're short of, I can't get him in because casualties is overflowing, and I don't want to bring him through A&E because he's sick. So I'm just waiting for a bed." And he said, "Well, that's fine." And I said, "No, really, it's not fine." I said, "When were you last in an A&E?" And he stopped and he said, "Not for a long time." And I said, "If all of you were in A&E for overnight, this problem would be gone." And I thought about no A&E exposure, no vote for the election, but I'm glad I did because it'd be even more chaotic. But I think that I often feel that if our politicians had more exposure at the coalface, like at the 12 o'clock on a Sunday night, or sit beside a trolley of an 80-year-old in A&E, privately, I think that a lot of our, we would probably get more of a focus on improving healthcare delivery. So the other reason this is important is that the number of patients who have survived cancer in our community is growing. So in Ireland, the cancer care is growing by 7% a year in terms of the number of people in our service. So we've got a 5% increase year on year in the number of people developing cancer, and a 2% increase year on year in the number of people living with cancer. So where they've had cancer and it's gone and they're cured, or where they had cancer, it's come back and they're living with cancer. So there's a lot of interest in this. This is a slide looking at studies over time of cancer survivorship, and you can see that the number of research areas of studies increasing significantly over time, which is great because it means there's an interest in it. There's also an interest in this. It's called P4 medicine, which is predictive, participatory, personalised, and preventative. But it's this model of more involvement of patients in cancer care, in that the P is participatory, just as important as being personalised, predictive, or preventative. And so this is a new area in cancer medicine also in terms of integrating patients more into care. And the need for this is highlighted in this here, and I know you can't see it, I'm sorry you can't see this, but this is a study published in the noughties looking at doctors and cancer and pain. And the arrow here is Ireland, and so they ask patients what they thought about their doctors. So 26% of patients say that the quality of life wasn't taken into account very more. 33% said that the doctors would prefer to treat cancer rather than treat the pain. In other words, prescribe chemo rather than prescribe painkillers. So I think we're in the middle of the road in all of the other groups, but in this, but it does highlight the need that sometimes our focus can be more on the cancer and away from being holistic. Ways to improve this include the internet. So this is a system developed in England, and what it is for people on chemotherapy that they have a cell phone, and the cell phone calls them. They get a text in the morning to say take the tablets, and then the other thing is then they get are you experiencing side effects? So say for instance you have diarrhea today, so you press the diarrhea button, and a drop down menu comes asking you how much diarrhea, and then depending on that, on what you press on the mobile phone here, it goes to a system, and if there's it's either green, go ahead with treatment, yellow you need to talk to a nurse, or red you need to talk to a doctor. It's kind of a traffic light system. So it reduces hospital admissions, and it represents a breakthrough in terms of being able to understand what patients are perceiving with therapy. It also has a way of measuring it more readily than standard measures. Doctors tend to underestimate side effects of treatment for patients. You could say, well, it's a mobile phone, and the older you are, the more likely you are to get cancer. My mum is 83, she cannot text. I know this. She can call, but she can't text. So, and a lot of, and she's very vibrant. She overfed my brother. I'm still getting over that. So what can be done for those patients? So in the Western Isles in Scotland, they have a system where people have Skype access. So the patient sits down at her table and puts open the computer, and that switches it on. And then the problem then with Skype is who you're going to talk to. So they have color-coded scarves, and she puts on the scarf, and when she crosses the scarf, depending on which colour scarf she puts on, there's a transponder in that, and it activates the Skype link. And then when she wants to stop the call, she takes off, she undoes the scarf. And depending on who she wants to talk to, she uses a different scarf. So this is used in the oncology services in the Western Isles in Scotland for remote care access for patients. So prevents them needing to come to clinic, you have immediate access, and also it's probably much more effective because you can screen the, you can get a nurse, for instance, to talk to the patient and screen the calls to see who does or doesn't need to be dwelt on. The Canadians have taken this to another level called the Canadian Virtual Hospice, and because of the remoteness of some communities, if you live in Canada and you've got a Canadian Social Security number, you can access this Canadian Virtual Hospice, and it gives advice. You enter your social security number to access it. So it's very helpful in terms of how do I talk to the children if I'm dying of cancer? What do I say to at a funeral mass? How do I deal with this? And they give written answers back by email. It's a phenomenal website. I would encourage you to have a look at it. The other thing that's becoming more and more relevant in our time, and I'm very involved in our house and a very great believer in it, as Robert Frost says, hope does not lie in a way out, but in a way through. And in our studies, it has been consistently shown that if you have depression with cancer, you do worse. So these are survivals of patients with and without depression. So if you don't have depression, your survival is here. If you do have depression, your survival is significantly worse. So these differences is at least as big as any of the anti-cancer drugs that I've shown you this afternoon. So it's very important that we don't just address the anti-cancer effect of treatment, but also we address the mental aspects of treatment, because that may have as important a benefit to the patient as giving them cancer chemotherapy. And the other one that's important is the impact of it on life beyond the patient. So this is a book called The Monster Calls, and it was written by this woman called Siobhan Dow. It was started by her. She had breast cancer and died of breast cancer, wanted to leave something for the children. And it was then finished by this guy called Patrick Ness. And it's going to be a movie, and the narrator is Liam Neeson. And the kid is here in the room, and this is the monster out here, which is cancer. And it's in the form of a yew tree, and it's significant because the mum got Taxol, and Taxol is derived from the yew tree. And it's a very powerful book. It's not a happy book. We tell the medical students about it and our doctors to read it because we give them a perception of life at the other side, and that the area, the people in the waiting room, the family members that accompany them, and the impact of cancer beyond that. There's also the best group, I think, for involving cancer survivors in care is this group called the ABC group. So this is a meeting that's held every 2 years in Lisbon of advanced breast cancer, where we get the guidelines for advanced breast cancer. This is kind of our roadmap to how to look after breast cancer. And at this meeting, this survivor made a statement to the group, to the doctors: your contributions go way beyond the name on a high-profile scientific journal. While we want the public to understand us, we need you to understand us and support us. And if you're interested in us, our lives will be longer and better. If we are invisible to you or merely extensions of the mice in the lab, the light we hold for a better future goes dark because nothing will change. There will be no sense of urgency to improving outcomes for us in the clinic. And I think that this is very important to integrate into cancer research and to get the mindset that this, it's not just about papers and stuff, it's about advancing care for patients. So this is where it comes unhinged a little bit. This is called conscious uncoupling, to borrow from Gwyneth Paltrow. And this was at one of our meetings at the American Society of Clinical Oncology in May, where they had a global forum. And they made the point that this 10% of the world's population have access to palliative care at the end of life. Only 10% have access to the development of this the largest cancer meeting in the world. In England, they eliminated 40 drugs from their cancer budget to pay for one drug for melanoma. And some of these drugs would be fairly routine drugs that we would use, and would view them as pretty much essential desert island drugs. But they feel that they're too expensive to be a benefit, and there's this tension between what pharma can charge for the drugs and what we can afford to pay as a society. And this is a significant issue. 3 in 7 of the world's population have access to cell phone, and only 1 have access to cancer care. In CUH on Wednesday, the grand rounds is by a neurosurgeon from Senegal, talking about the difficulties of delivering care in challenging environments. I think it would be so it's public talk, so if any of you would like to come, you'd be more than welcome. I think it could be really interesting. It's at 1 o'clock in the lecture hall in CUH. If we look at, this is a map showing, I started with an atlas and I'm going to finish with an atlas. This is looking at access to surgery for cancer care. So 0, but this is the reverse. It's not whether you have, it's whether you don't have. So these people don't have, and these people have much less. So you can see only 10% of the world's population have access to cancer surgery. You can see it's very good in most of the areas that we live in and know about, but in large areas of the world, it's very poor. So this access to care is a major issue for us. This is from the Irish Times website. When I was doing the talk on Thursday, Uganda's only radiotherapy machine breaks down. 44,000 new cancer patients seen in Uganda last year. That's twice the number of people that we see in Ireland every year. This is not a third world problem, this is a first world problem as well. Joe Biden said Obama offered financial help for his son's illness because the drugs that they were on could cost up to $8,000 a month. And a lot of this is out-of-pocket expenses for people. The newer drugs are more expensive, so this is over time, drug approval from the US Food and Drug Administration from 1960 to 2010, looking at the trend is only in one direction. So this is why the clinical trials is important in Ireland, because to have access to these out here earlier on, equitably, we need clinical trials infrastructure in order to allow that to happen. And this is a similar graph, looking even more dramatic. You can see the cost is going up dramatically. What we spend on cancer care doesn't equate into outcomes. So this is a relation between how much money we spend and cancer deaths. So you can see here there's a large range from 10,000 per case of cancer to 40,000. But you can see there's very little difference in mortality between each of these. It's probably how we spend it and how we integrate the spending that's important, rather than just the amount of it. And that's why the cancer strategy and those documents are important, because it's the integration of things that makes the biggest impact in terms of outcome. So I just want to finish with that. I'd like to thank Sharon and some others for the slides they gave, which made this talk much quicker and easier to do. And thank you for attending. The sun is still shining out there. I looked over once and I thought my brother's shadow had extended out there. and the sun had gone, and I was like, God.